because that's what I do. And so if everything goes right, we're going to be watching a video, probably either started Wednesday or started Thursday. So I want to make sure I'm set up. I have it set up for Friday, but if I can get it done on Thursday, I'm going to do it. But I want to make sure I'm up to it. We're going to watch a video. The worksheet's in that little packet on the Revolutionary War. So we got King Philip's War. What was the kind of imperialism where they would make the area would still remain independent, but it'd be a protectorate? Yes. And yeah, economic. And what was it? Where they have the flag? I also call it. Sometimes settlers would come in, like happened in America and Australia because of disease. What kind of colonialism? I would say. Colonial imperialism. Yay, we got that. Well, imperialism is what? Empire for what? Profit. Empire. The fur trade was what type of imperialism first? Yes, economic and cultural. Economic and cultural. It kind of, and so much of cultural, it really is tied in how you survive. And your position, how much wealth, where you get food, how much food you have. That really does decide your culture and your social class. And so, we got through here, King Philip's War. Did we get how they won? They ambushed them. And the thing about it, just imagine this whole process of we're moving westward, English colonists moving westward, and France is moving this way. So imagine that process, and then they hit in the middle. So there's going to be a whole series of wars for empire. Government borrows money. What do we call that instrument that government borrows money in? Bonds. The U.S. government, they issue what? Something. Yeah, treasury bills. And if the government's weak, or they're worried they might not be able to pay back their debt, government has to do what to interest rates? Yeah, give more. Give more interest. And that's what Britain is worried about. And it's one of those things, it's amazing how countries think about that. And decisions that might affect the entire world and lead to war could just be, we don't want to pay more interest. And it seems just like, oh, you base your things on that. Well, yeah, they do base it. Don't forget it. When it's gold, it's finite, and it really hits you. So we got this. Oh, and that became the norm then, divide and conquer. The English colonists became known for surprise attacks. If you know anything about the United States fighting American Indians on the plains, the United States was infamous for surprise attacks, especially in the winter. I'm from Eastern Montana, so boy, and I really hit there. And one tribe against the other. And there's, so King Philip, by the way, how did he, phonetically, what was his name actually? Yeah, probably wasn't Metacomet, but I can't help it. As an English speaker, I get Metacomet. I don't know where to put the accent. And so we get the wars for empire then. So Britain and France, then this will begin a whole series of wars. And it's going to be about the fur trade, but it's going to rage everywhere. And the French have better relations with American Indian tribes. It's not because the French were nicer or better. It's because not near as many French came to New France. And if not as many French came here, and especially along the Mississippi, there's basically St. Louis, New Orleans, and a fort here at Fort Vincent of Vincennes. Not many French came, so there wasn't as much pressure on American Indians, where there's so many more English colonists. And the war then is going to be right along this frontier. They're both the British and the British colonies. They're fighting each other for land, and the French. And the people in the middle, they're just trying to desperately find a way to play them off each other and survive. And one of the great ironic twists, the French would have better relations. And then during the Revolutionary War, the British would, because the various tribes realized, we got to stop the U.S. or we're going to lose all our land. And so, that's war for empire. And these are just claims. So the British didn't have anybody living here, they just claimed it. Because Henry Hudson claimed it for Britain. Then they kicked him out of his boat right about here. Because he wanted to keep going. All right, so with that, the first of these wars, and I'm going to go through these fast. This is the name of the colony. So we have King William's War. King William's War. And you don't need to know the name of the colonies. You'll see if you look on like history books, they'll call it the French-Dutch Wars, or the War of the Rhine, the War of the Regency, the War of the Frontiers. At the time, everyone called it the War of the League of Augsburg. You don't need the War of the League of Augsburg. I know what you're thinking, and I agree. This is my favorite Augsburg-related war, too. But Augsburg's a little German town, Western Germany. But the war is fought along the frontier, and here are French and your American allies attacking a British fort, and so on. This is William and Mary. William and Mary. King James II of England was ousted because he was becoming too dictatorial and maybe Catholic. They had to find a relative who was Protestant. His sister was the Queen of the Netherlands, and so William was the King of the Netherlands, and so they became the King and Queen of England too. The Netherlands was fighting France, and all of a sudden, once he became King of England, England was fighting France. And that's how the war started. And the war ended a slight French victory in Europe, but colonial status quo. Have you heard the term status quo before? That means go back to the way it was before. Nothing changed. Nothing changed. And this would be the norm. There would be some bloody, awful fighting, really violent fighting on the frontier, as all these kind of colonial battles are, especially for the people desperately trying to save their land. And you can see from this, there's some arrows happening. There are a few attacks by the British here and the French down to here, but nothing came out of it. Yeah?
What did you say the colonial status quo means?
Back to the way it was before. So nothing changed. Nothing changed. William and Mary did not have an heir. They didn't have an heir. They both died without an heir. So it went to Mary's sister, Queen Anne. And so the next war will be Queen Anne's War. And in Europe, you don't need to know this. I just put it up there just so, the War of the Spanish Succession. That's where it started. But it's Queen Anne's War in the colonies. What I mean with the 13 colonies total. And this was another one of those battles. There's a few more English colonists, bloody along the frontiers, but another status quo when it ended. Actually, the British won the war worldwide. The British did really well, but not the colonies. Now, poor Queen Anne just couldn't. She couldn't have an heir either. She was pregnant 17 times. 17 times, and none of her children lived past the age of 1. Most were stillborn. She had no heir, and it drove her crazy. The pain and hell that she went through. It was constantly. She'd be pregnant, stillborn, and try to get pregnant as quick as she could again because you have to have an heir. And a third of all women died of childbirth back then. And how she survived it's unbelievable, but it literally drove her mad. And I could only imagine the hell she went through. She kept a bunny for each pregnancy, so she ended up with 17 rabbits. It's one of those like something to remember by, which makes it kind of maybe even more tragic. So I always feel very sorry for Queen Anne. By the way, that's part of the reason why life expectancy was so low up into the 20th century. So many women died of childbirth, and a significant number of children died before they reached 1. If you reach 10, your life expectancy wasn't a heck of a lot different than someone today reaching 10. The problem was getting to 10. You just had to get to 10 first. But then in the 20th century, clean water, vaccinations, better food, healthcare, so women all of a sudden start surviving childbirth, and then all of a sudden women start living longer than men. That's a 20th century phenomenon. So, should I add one more thing? In England, it's the law. You can't have a Catholic king. The closest relative was Catholic, Bonnie Prince Charlie. They couldn't have him. So they found a distant cousin who was the prince of a little tiny kingdom of a little tiny kingdom in Germany called Hanover. His cousin Protestant brought him over, and that's going to be King George I. And so that became the new monarchy. So the Germans, the monarchs of Britain. That would eventually die out, and they find more Germans. Saxe-Coburg, Queen Victoria was a German, and that's the family today. So the monarchs of Britain are Germans. And World War I, they had to change the name. Saxe-Coburg's German, and then we can't have a German royal name, so they changed it to Windsor after their castle. So they're still the House of Windsor today, but they're Germans. Inbred Germans. Have you looked at them? You ever seen Prince Charles? Looks like a horse. And so let's be very clear about it. In fact, this is something I want to make very clear. This is film, life lesson. I've already told you one, cannibalism bad, right? What's life lesson 2? Yeah, don't marry your cousin. Don't marry your cousin. All right? Yes, incest bad. Don't marry your cousin, or you have horse bred. I will show you down the road. Maybe I'll show you some of the Habsburg monarchs. You see what happens if you marry your cousin too many times. That didn't sound right, but just about. All right, so the next war, the infamous War of Dunkin's ear. So this ear-related war actually was for 4 or 5 years, about 4.5 years it was fought, or 3.5 years, I'm sorry. But Britain and Spain, the actual impetus of this starts in 1731. When a Royal Navy ship was stopped by Spanish off the coast of Cuba, a frigate, it's a fast, thin sailing boat. They're used to patrol, not a lot of cannon. And they accused him of being a pirate. And so in 1731, off the coast of Cuba, Spanish ships jumped it because it had its sails down, and they roughed him up. Now, normally, the Spanish would have killed them all on board the ship because they thought the Rebecca Jenkins ship were pirates. And they probably were. Many Royal Navy captains would double as pirates. They'd see a lone Spanish ship, they'd take down the Union Jack, which by then was very much like that flag now, and they put up what flag? They saw the Spanish flag. We're friends! And they get close, and then the last second, down comes that flag, a black flag. And yeah, they did have skull and crossbow. And normally the Spanish would execute him, but instead they cut off Jenkins' ear. They chopped it off. But that was a plucky ear. And over the next 6 years, it made it back to Parliament. You can't tie that ear down. Then they stuck it in a jar of rum and brought it back. And rum back then was this really thick, syrupy stuff. The alcohol was maybe 20%. So just imagine basically the color of your sweatshirt, this gray thing. And they brought it out to Parliament. And so 6 years after the fact, when England wanted, basically they wanted a commercial war to open up Jamaica, the sugar colony there. They brought this ear out and said, look what the Spanish did to our captains. Unprovoked, they cut the ear out. They took the ear out and they started passing the ear around. Like, oh, look at this ear. So here's a picture showing the ear off to her. Look at this ear. And yes, the ear is in a jar in Parliament today. I was standing in line going to Parliament, this is about 12 years ago. And I'm standing there and waiting, to go. It was worth it, but you have to wait in line. And I just happened to kind of look over, there's an ear. But they won't let you take pictures in there. And I thought about it. And like the guards just know, because I was doing one of these, let me get a picture of the ear. And I look over, and there's the guards just looking at me. Everybody wants a picture of the ear, I guess. So, and they went to war. This was a naval war. It was in the Caribbean. Another one of these status quo one, but it's one of the few ear-related wars that we're going to have to know in class. There's about 4 other ones, ear-related, so I'm making that one. Okay. And the War of Dunkin's ear. I always wondered what they were thinking. They literally took it out of the jar, like, look at this thing. I mean, you can imagine how it just, because it did not look like an ear. It looked something like cauliflower. And there were pieces, but let me tell you more. No. What do you guys have for lunch? Moving on. And then, of course, King George's War. For reasons I can't explain, I didn't write the years down. So 1744 to 1748. This is King George II, 44 to 48. And you don't need to know the War of Austrian Succession, but that's what it started out in Europe. And this time, the colonists, colonial militia, joined British soldiers. Now, militia, we'll talk about militia more down the road, but they actually participated in a few battles. Here there are New Englanders at a French fort called Louisbourg up on Cape Breton Island. And they took this fort and they did really well. But when the treaty was ratified, another status quo. In fact, the term they would use is status quo ante bellum. And what that means is the way it was before the war. So in the United States, you would see it, and I would call it in class, before the Civil War, they'll call it the antebellum period. And some people find this uncomfortable now when you say antebellum because they think of the issues of slavery and the events that led to the Civil War. And I know why they say that, but it's also, it just simply means before the war. Just before the war period. And the French are in trouble. The French can see the writing on the wall. Each war they did worse than the colonies. Each war. And so the best way to look at this, so we have 4 wars and then constant fighting, and the French and the Spanish were allies, but Spain was on the decline. There were 10 times more British colonists than French colonists. That's why the French have better relations. And so the French, they're going to overwhelm them. And then the Royal Navy was stronger than the French Navy. And the French Navy is going to get caught in a hurricane in the 1750s. And that would destroy much of their fleet anyways. And so the French are thinking, we're going to have to strike first. A preventative war. A war, we know the British are going to overwhelm us. So we need, if there's a chance of war, we strike first. So we do well early on in the war because all these wars seem to end with a status quo treaty. So we strike first, hold out, status quo. This is actually a pretty dangerous thing. Oh, these are the maps then. This shows all the claims, but very few French live there. These are just claims. And once again, the people who actually live there are caught in the middle. And most of the fighting would be in the Great Lakes area, but the fighting of the French and Indian War, we'll get to in a second, is right here. Well, in the colonies, it would be worldwide. And this is the area everybody wanted. Farmland, fur, water. But a preventative war is this idea that somehow you can predict the future. We can kind of predict the future, where we look at, if you know the past, you can guess the future. If you don't know the past, you have a very difficult time guessing the future. By the way, people who know the past, they will manipulate and cheat you. People like me. No, it's very true. Those who know the past will manipulate. It always has happened. Not everybody who knows the past. Yes, I'm manipulating. So with that, and I forgot what I was going to say. Let's go back to creating my army to take over the school, because everyone's out to get me. Right? So we have to fight back. I'm not paranoid. I just know it. Every day, fish. So, but if you don't know the future, couldn't you say anything about a potential enemy and say, they're going to attack me, so I'm going to attack them? Couldn't you say anything? Preventative war, by definition today, is just a war of aggression. It's a war of aggression. You're guessing. That would be the justification for the South starting the Civil War. Someday the North is going to do it, so we're going to blow the whole thing up. We're going to take away our slaves. And that was their reason. They'll create a Republican Party in the South and destroy slavery. World War I will all be preventative wars. Everybody's saying, we know someday they're going to attack, especially Germany, so we better go now. In fact, we almost blew up the world in 1962 over the Cuban Missile Crisis. Someday the Soviets will attack, so let's just do it. That'd be the justification for going into Iraq. They might get weapons of mass destruction, so we just gotta go. But we have no idea what their future is going to be. So these are actually really dangerous things. So that's what the French are thinking. And by the way, it blew up in the French face completely. So with that, the French and Indian War, 1754 to 1763. In Europe, this would be called the 7 Years' War. And this is the first one of these wars where the fighting will begin in the colonies. It would begin in what is now Western Pennsylvania. And this is a very stylized picture of French and probably Shawnee. The Shawnee and the Miami were fierce fighters. Fierce. They're just, the numbers were low because of disease. By the way, I'll tell you that story later. I jumped the gun. So, the key part was the Ohio River Valley. So the mighty Ohio, big river, rains a lot. This river right here. I have the map up there, I could have pointed there. So this area right here. And the first thing we already talked about, the fur trade. Because they had wiped out the beaver here. So now they wanted it here. And there's a big competition for it. Oh, this is supposed to be, so these are a few probably Shawnee looking over where the Ohio River starts right here, the Monongahela and Allegheny River run together and create the Ohio right there. It's really pretty there. It's mountainous. Low mountains compared to the Rocky Mountains, they're just different style of mountains, but there's so much more rain. It's not more forested, and like there's a creek everywhere. And I think running water through mountains is one of the most beautiful things in the world. And so if you ever get a chance, I would recommend it. It's really cool. A lot more people live there though, too. So there's But the other thing is just simply land. There's all this land there. And don't forget, we have tobacco cultivators are using up land. We have people who want land who went to the colonies and the good land's taken and they want their own land. Some of the reason they went there, their idea of freedom is owning that piece of land. And yes, there are people who live there who might not want to give it up. So the French and the British had a claim. So both of the French and the British said this is ours. But to make it more complicated, the British have other claims too. All the colonies had a claim. Virginia claimed it. Pennsylvania claimed it. New York claimed it. New Jersey claimed it. Massachusetts claimed it. Maryland claimed it. Do you get the point? And you might think, well, if the British claim it, what does Virginia care? Well, Virginia wants it. Virginia colony wants Virginia to be stronger. They didn't want the British to create another colony, to create an Ohio or whatever.
They all owned part of it, or they all thought they owned?
They all thought they did. So they had a land claim. Now remember, that claim just mattered to them, to the British and the French. The claim of the people who lived there, they didn't care too much. It was a little more complex. And so with that, while this is going on, that's where you get the Albany Plan of Union. Ben Franklin, sitting in Pennsylvania, realizes this is a real issue. We're sitting here in Philadelphia, and we know all this land is opening up, and there are all these tribes here that we're trying to deal with, and the French, and with Britain. So they have 13 representatives to the Iroquois, to the French, to London. Say, we have to unify. And so here's a very stylized picture of him dealing with representatives from the 6 tribes, what they call the Iroquois Confederacy. And have you seen this picture before? The snake cut in pieces, yeah. That was from Ben Franklin's Poor Richard's Almanac. United we are strong, divided we fall. And so he wanted a loose confederacy and a common militia. Army I put down, but militia is a better way to put it. A loose confederation of the colonies, and so we can speak with one voice to London, one voice to the tribes, one voice to France. The problem was these colonies all hated each other. They're in competition. At this very moment, Pennsylvania and Virginia look like they're going to go to war themselves to try to get the Ohio River, let alone the French and everybody else. It was based upon the Iroquois Confederacy. We started as 5, but then 6 tribes had a loose confederation. And here is Ben Franklin meeting with representatives of Iroquois. So we call the Iroquois Confederacy. back then, if you would have referred to them, you would have, you lived in Philadelphia, you would have said the 6 tribes. They just all called them the 6 tribes. The Seneca and the Shawnee were probably the strong. The Seneca were powerful, but they too were devastated by disease. And then it failed miserably. I should have put 2 with 2 O's, but I didn't because I got tired. I was just so tired I couldn't hit the O one more time. You know, I needed a break. I don't quit. I just realized that I should change that. And I won't. So that. But nothing brings people closer together than a common enemy. The common enemy is coming. Ironically, it's going to be themselves. So with that, but what are plantation owners? These plantation owners would be key. Tobacco prices were dropping because more tobacco is being cultivated. North Carolina is just beginning to grow tobacco, a lot of tobacco. And the soil is getting depleted. And here's the thing. Every single farmer is in what? Yes. And they got to find a way to pay that back. So you can imagine there's a little bit of desperation in Virginia colony. And so they really want this land over the Appalachian Mountains. If they can get there and get there first, they can lay claim. And the area south of the Ohio is going to be very good for tobacco. North Carolina and Kentucky now are the biggest tobacco cultivators in the United States. And what are the second and third sons of these Burgesses? Remember the dandies I talked about for Jamestown? Well, what about the big plantation owners in Virginia? They're second or third sons. Are you going to give them tiny little plots of the land with the worst soil? Or they have to go out on their own? But if they can get the Ohio Valley, they can make it on their own. So you have a lot of very ambitious / greedy second or third sons who want to get over there too. And then how do you make money? Speculation. There's not a lot of money in the colonies. Speculation is key. Now, what is speculation? Speculation, in many ways, is the basis of the economy today in the United States. Part of the reason why there are some people with massive fortunes. Virtually nobody who has a massive fortune made it by building something. They made it by speculation. What speculation? Say it again.
Stock market.
Yeah, it could be the stock market or land. And what do? If you buy land or stock, you buy it when it's what? Cheap. You buy it cheap, and what are you hoping? You're kind of gambling that what's going to happen. Price goes up and people will want it. So, buy low, hope to sell high. So you're betting that people are going to want this. And you know what? They're right. They're going to want this. If they can get here and lay claim to the best land, be the first there, claim it, you get to buy low and sell high. But it's a gamble because, especially if you borrowed money to buy it when it's low and it continues to drop, you're kind of sunk. But stock market the same way. You're open to buy stock low and sell it high. And so I'll give you a classic example. Elon Musk did not become one of the richest men in the world now because he made a relatively unreliable car. He made it because of stock. He made it because people are speculating the stock and get stock. That's where he got his billions from. Yeah, the company is probably it's overvalued through a lot of speculation. It's just the way it is. It will tumble, but sometime. But yeah, that's what happened. Same with Amazon. It's stock value. It's stock value, and so it's speculation. So land's a big one, stocks a big one. It was land or real estate speculation that blew up the world's economy in 2007. Your first big economic crash. That's implied there'll be another one. I'm sorry. Back when I was your age, those kind of things didn't happen. But now, and that's what's happening now with real estate values. People are speculating, especially big private equity companies. Yeah.
What is your stocks?
We'll talk about it, but a stock is essentially a share of a corporation. So a little piece of a corporation. And we will talk more about that down the road. Like it's like a partial ownership. And you have a really big company like, let's say, General Motors, you know, there are millions of shares of stock. So there's lots of owners. Yes?
So is our economy expected to crash since so much speculation?
I'm not expecting, I mean, it's really hard to tell. That's one of the problems. You know, the prices go up and up and up, and we don't know when it will pop. That's what they call it, a bubble. But a lot of the indicators are there, but we don't see the same kind of debt ratio for public yet. So it doesn't seem like it's 2007, but it could be like 2004. You know, that's what history will give you an indication, but not 100%. It could happen, but it might not. You know, there's some also, there's some things that look like it could be, we could weather this storm, prices will stabilize, and things will get better. Right now, prices are crazy. It's just insane how much real estate is. Just insane. So, if you can get that land claim first, you plot out a piece of land. By the way, wouldn't it be good to be the person with there and you're a surveyor and know how to survey land? Wouldn't that be great if you could get there? Gee, I wonder what I'm talking about. But, oh, good map, isn't this? 1760. Pretty amazing map. You have Virginia, the Ohio Valley. Isn't that a good map? They knew what, I mean, they knew what they were doing. It's not like they could fly over and take it. They couldn't get the satellite out. I'm very impressed with them. They're very talented people. Surveying is tough, and they had to do it all for hand. But the big thing is it's gamble. I mean, it's literally rolling the die. That's why in many ways, Wall Street or speculation, I mean, it's like a big casino. And there could be massive, massive, massive profits, but also titanic losses. If you're the person in the middle, like facilitating it, you can get richer than rich. That's why investment banks are huge now. That's another story for down the road. We're going to talk about that when we get to the Great Depression. So, in 1754, Virginia wanted to be there first. And for the second time, they sent a very young man, the third son of a plantation owner named George Washington. And they sent Washington there. He already went there once before to the headwaters of the Ohio, where the Allegheny and the Monongahela River run together, and he was going to build a fort. He got there and saw that the French were already there. So they sent him again, before the Pennsylvanians could get there too. Now this is colonial militia. They're fighting for Virginia colony. So you can say, well, they're the British. They're the Virginians. That's the way they looked at it. And they're, and the thing about Washington, shockingly ambitious. The third son, he was given a small little piece of land that was pretty much used up. And he thought, the only way I'm going to make it is I'm going to have to get there first and get this land. Now, he didn't have a formal education, being the third son, like his two older brothers who were given the classical education of an English gentleman. But he knew how to survey. That could be handy, couldn't it? And all he wanted to do is be rich, become an English gentleman, live like an English gentleman, and of course, be an officer of the British Army. That was his goal in life. That's what he wanted. And it all wrapped around land. His whole life, he was obsessed with land in the Ohio River. Even when he was president. And you think, he's nearing the end. No, he was obsessed with it. Obsessed about getting this land. He was a land speculator. He was a gambler. It's kind of weird to think about George Washington as one of his big gamble, but that's what he was. Very intelligent, but also very self-conscious of the fact he's not a gentleman. He couldn't speak French, for example, and that was the language of gentlemen. He didn't have that classical education. Practical, smart. So militia, and mostly a tribe from Western Virginia, the Mingos, led by a guy named Half King. They went with, and basically they were told, we're going to get some booty, some prizes, and we'll build a fort. And think about the generation they grew up in. How are they going to get from Williamsburg, Virginia, to the headwaters of the Ohio River? Walk. And why they went that kind of road? Now, don't think of a road like, interstate highway system. About this wide, enough for a pack animal. But they cut a road. And it wasn't like, you're kidding, I'm going to walk 800 miles and cut a road? They're like, of course I'm going to walk 800 miles and cut a road. And so it gives you an idea of their generation, their expectations. Don't forget, they were tough. And this is my generation. We just cut a road. How do you think I got the hell on? I cut a road for Miles City. And now it's like a highway. So I don't want credit, I just did it. So they're going to march to the headwaters of the Ohio River, and the French were there. They built a fort already called Fort Duquesne. And it was, at Washington, you could just almost hear how crestfallen he was. Like, oh, now what? The French beat us. He has no idea how many French are there. He has no idea how many Seneca or Shawnee Rock allies they have. He knows he can't take the fort. They don't know what to do. But if he goes back, he might go back in disgrace. And he is desperate. To his point of view, he doesn't have much time. He's 22. In the land at this era, the clock is ticking. And so, oh, here, by the way, here's Duquesne, Star Fort. And it was wooden along the Monongahela. This is actually Washington's map of the Monongahela and the Allegheny running together. Right here. And Lake Erie. By the way, Star Fort, they started making these forts because of cannon. The flat old castle walls, cannonballs would go through it. So they make them lower, and they would take a wall. This is my armor. So if you want to make a castle, pay attention. So this is the wall. It's this thick, right? But if you turn the wall, you notice what I mean? If you have it at an angle, then it becomes wide. If it's angled, it can become a little wider. And if it's at an angle, cannonballs might deflect off. So that's why they made forts like that. So if you ever see a tank, so like a U.S. Abrams tank or British or German Leopard tank, things like that, their armor is like this on the front of the turret. Why? Same. See, now you're ready to make a tank and a fort.
Nice.
See? Life lessons. Don't marry your cousin. Slanted armor. Now keep your cousins away. So with that, so it's coming up to the Humanville Affair. So there's a French lieutenant by the name, it's like Pierre, Jonas, there's about 5 different names, Jumonville. So we just call him Jumonville. And he was basically he and about 20 other French soldiers rode out from Duquesne to basically tell the Virginians, go home, this is ours. So it's a mission, it's under a flag of truce, or at least that was the plan. Flag of truce, what color flag? Yeah, they were using white flags by then. And flag of truce. White flag, no blood on it. And so it's sheep, no blood, basically peace. And they're the warning. Washington, though, saw them and he doesn't know what to do. He thought, I got to figure out how many French are there. And so he disregards what their mission could be, and he decides to ambush them. And he attacks the French, thus starting a world war. Now, I'm not saying it wouldn't have started anyway, so it's not saying Washington and I'm going to start a war. That will eventually lead to the United States, and I can be president. No, he was not thinking that. He just was desperate, and he made a dumb decision. He attacked it. And so this is how heavily forested it is with these big rocks. And think about it, evening, they swept out a sharp fight, and Jumonville's captured. Oh, by the way, this is what they called the French there. They were Canadians. You notice the E? That means French. And if you know hockey, you call the NHL. What's Montreal, their team? Canadians spelled like that. I don't follow the NHL really, but does anybody? That's the name. I just never played it, so. But one of my best friends is a big Montreal fan, so I know. He always wants me to become a fan, so he tells me all the time. And I'm polite sometimes. So with that, they captured Jumonville. So Jumonville's captured, and Washington's going to gather information. So imagine gloomy forest, the sun's going down, a few fires built up. There are wounded men, they're screaming, the bell rings. I guess I won't tell you the story. So,
You always leave on such good cliffhangers.
I was-
Funny.
darn it, I want to get through them. I thought I'd get right to the end of the story. Have a good day, everybody. So the test would be mostly about armor. Armor for tanks, forts, starports.
Thank you.
See you tomorrow.
Would it be fine that I do a quiz tomorrow?
Just remind me.
Okay, because I think I missed two quizzes. Or no, I missed the quiz yesterday.
Oh,
And
yeah,
then
you
taken
did.
out the other quiz.
Either, yeah, just remind me tomorrow.
Okay.
It's a little video with it.
Yeah.
It's a short idea I want to make. So just remind me tomorrow.
Okay.
But I'm counting on you to remind me. I will forget.
I will.
It's our no. Getting old here. Oh, quick beat. Shot out of the cannon. Oh, we got a shot. I've recorded last period.
Ah, yes.
You want to get on here real quick? Quick, up front. Oh no, camera's right there. Scare the people at home. Oh, this figure disappears. All right, it is now not recorded. Yeah, I know.